feel good to know that we're at the end of the day. I like ringing that bell. Makes me feel like a ding-a-ling. And since it's getting towards 5 o'clock, I have every right to be silly. Let's see, all of you were here at the last conference, so I don't have to recap or anything from the last conference. You remember everything perfectly for everything that I said for the whole 10 minutes that I spoke. So basically what April and I are about is that we've been trying to put together, or we have been putting together, and we are still putting together. So I guess it's in the progressive tense into the indefinite future, an organization that we had called Alexandria West. A name that was suggested by Victor Indersby in 1985. So in a sense, that was its birth when it got a name, was in 1985. And it's kind of interesting watching the progress of it, because from about 1985 to 1992, we really didn't do too much. Victor passed away in 1987, so we inherited his library and archives, and so I spent several years working with those archives. But we didn't do very much in a public way. And it wasn't until about 1992, that's 7 years later. Interesting number 7. It keeps coming up in Theosophical history, doesn't it? 7 years later, we finally were in a position where we started classes and started to create an organization. And so we did that, and it was an experimental time, experimenting with pedagogy. What are we going to teach? What are we going to represent? What techniques are we going to use and such? And that went from 1992 to 1999. In 1999, we legally incorporated. That happened to have been 7 years later. And I didn't realize this until last night, by the way. This wasn't planned. This wasn't on purpose. And then from 1999, with the incorporation, up until about 2006, a lot of things started happening. I won't go into the details of them, but it was a lot of things did happen, and it was the things of the nature that required us to think very carefully about what we're doing and what we're going to do next. So it was sort of one of those 7-year better pay more attention periods, which we did. So from 2006, I guess the next 7-year period is going to happen in about 2013. And since we're already beginning to venture into publishing and also securing a building, it'll be interesting as to what fruits or disappointments the next 7-year period will bring. But I thought that was curious. I just had to share it because I just thought about it last night, or I just realized it last night when I was thinking about what to say. Our objectives we'd set up was that basically we wanted to set up a school for the revival of the lost mysteries of antiquity, but somebody already used that phrase about around the turn of the last century. And it was pretty hard to come up with a better way of saying that. But basically, we've always had that in mind. It's, I think it's an idea that captures the human imagination universally. The idea of doing that, especially if you think back upon ancient civilizations that were a part that represents the great learning centers of the world. And of course, that's what Victor had in mind when he had suggested Alexandria as a reference to Alexandria, Egypt. And our objective then would be for the promulgation of perennialism, and we chose that instead of the word theosophy, even though they mean the same thing, because the word theosophy seems to have gathered strange reactions from people over the years. It wasn't our fault. It's just many generations of theosophical activities over the years has created impressions among people, and we didn't want to have to keep fighting the same battles over and over again. So we used a word that was almost as unfamiliar to a lot of people, and that's perennialism. But it's working for us. And the third objective was to work to, in the educational factor, was to have a service component where the organization was about service, and that part of the training was for training people towards service, towards humanity, to make the world better than it was. I won't mention who suggested that component and absolutely insisted that it be within the objectives. But I'll give you 3 guesses as to who it might be. So as an organization, we're not a whole lot different from any theosophical organization. We have classes, have a library, we have special collections. People come and use the library, they do research. There's been, I think, about 3 people that have gone through that were doing academic research. At least one of those research projects, no, 2 of those research projects ended up with doctoral dissertations that awarded the researchers doctorate degrees. So I think that was pretty good accomplishment on our part to have been able to enable that. And the third one was research on Krishnamurti. A person who wanted to research Krishnamurti, I said, we don't have any material on Krishnamurti, nothing that you probably wouldn't find anywhere else. And he says, well, let me look anyway. And so he came up and he camped up in the archives for about 3 weeks. And then after he was finished, he says, this is the best resource for Krishnamurti that I've ever seen in my life, and I've been all over the world looking at archives. So I guess the moral of the story is that we don't quite know what we got. So our activities, well, classes, research. Another thing we do is field trips. So we several times a year invite people out on field trips. Many times it's based upon the study we do. We spent, I think, 2 years on the Kabbalah, and then at the end of that we had a field trip to a synagogue, sat through a service, and had a nice interview with the rabbi, who I think we rather annoyed. he really did not want to discuss Kabbalah. He was okay with Judaism, but he was rather annoyed that we would want to discuss Kabbalah, especially since some of the people in the class were under 40, and even worse, some of the people in the class were under 40 and women. And I think the one that really got him was that one of them demanded to know God's feminine name, which, by the way, he answered. Another thing we do once a year is we go to Vedanta ashram, and more recently we did a field trip to a Laotian Buddhist temple. And so those that were experienced meditators came there, and we went through the service, and we went through a couple of 45-minute sits, and then we did our kenhen, our walk, meditation walk. And at the end of it, I guess we were okay, because one of the abbots or one of the monks came up to us and said, you're all pretty experienced meditators, aren't you? You were quiet. So, like all groups, we do public presentations, and we're now working towards conferences. And conferences we do about twice a year for the general public. Most of the other stuff are for people that come to us, but about twice a year we go out and we do something that is public for other people. So we have different pedagogies for each of those, which is basically where we're at. And the material that we use falls in about 3 classifications. One of them is for those people that are coming in or don't have a particular interest in theosophy per se. And that's a large percentage of people that don't have a particular attraction to theosophy itself. But yet we are able to keep them and teach them all about theosophy without ever having to mention the word theosophy or even perennialism. And it's really not that hard to do. We use all of the books that HPB references in the Secret Doctrine. So we'll have a class one time, maybe on the Dhammapada, another class where we're going through the Zohar, another class where we might be, we had one class where we went through the Quran, another class where we went through the major Upanishads, and also we've had classes where we've gone through all of Plato's major writings. And so over a period of 10 or 15 years, we've the people that have stayed with us have had basically a very broad classical education that they wouldn't have had before otherwise. So comparative religions, for those that are interested in theosophy, we have a quarterly seminar that runs a half-day seminar on the Secret Doctrine. And we take turns. Each person that is in it is given a section, which is about 20 or 30 pages, usually in the Secret Doctrine. They devise their own material from what they want to do with it, and they have about 4 hours to do anything they want in presenting that material in their own style, in their own way, and in their own words. And I just sit back in the corner and smile. And that's some of the most delightful, some of the most fun stuff, especially those people that are just engaging themselves into the Secret Doctrine, you know, their first year or so into it. And it's quite amazing what they come up with, and the depth of intuition of some people. We also went through the Mahatma letters at one point, and presently there was an interest in going through Bruker's Fountain Source of Esotericism, and So we're doing that now. We're working our way through that, and they're all quite excited on that. So we have comparative religion, we have Theosophical section, and then more lately, who must be obeyed.
That's coming from your own projection.
Yes, dear. And well, not only her, but several people in the class, because every time a new baby is born or somebody has a problem, I usually end up reading a horoscope for them. Something I've been doing for about 50 years. And so they've been asking me for about 10 years to do an astrology class. So I says, no, you don't want to do an astrology class. Actually, it takes about 5 years of real dedication to be able to do anything with astrology, that's meaningful. If, those of you that have studied it, I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. But finally, I says, okay, here's how we're going to do the astrology class. First, we're going to do a class in Greek mythology, and you're all going to learn Greek mythology. So we had a class in Greek mythology. And then after we're finished with the class in Greek mythology, then we had a class on observational astronomy, and I sent them all out, and they had to go and look at the sky for a year and find the myths that related to the various constellations and the myths that related to the planets. Well, after a couple of years of that, they wanted to know when the astrology class was going to start. Had news for them. It already started 2 years ago. So now they're actually looking at horoscopes, little charts with circular charts with planets and signs on them. And so we've spent the last year looking at the patterns in the horoscopes without paying attention to what planets are making what patterns. In other words, very little attention to that. In other words, we haven't started talking about in any depth about the planets or what it means for Venus to be square Saturn or anything like that. We haven't even started to talk about that. We're just looking at patterns in the chart, and I mean overall patterns. What does it mean when all of the planets are sitting there at the bottom of the chart? What does it mean that they're all sitting at the bottom of the chart and there's one that's all by itself that's up at the top of the chart? And all those mean something. All mean something. So they're just discovering all of these patterns and all these patterns that are within the patterns. And actually, some of them are getting fascinated, about as fascinated with them as if I'd given them a brand new computer that they saw for the first time. It can have that effect on you. So when we do these classes, April had given you a demonstration, except that we usually don't go 2 hours in the classes. But what we do is invoke everybody into the conversation. And then we also do group work, as in the astrology class. I sent them out to look at the stars. So they do work individually, or they do work in a group. One public talk that we did was on masks. And that was inspired because April and I had traveled up to Alaska, and we came in contact with the Inuit people up there, and we looked through the museums, and that culture is a lot about masks. So we started looking a little more deeply into it, and then we finally did an all-day public seminar on masks. And after we did the material on mask, we had everybody get together, and we had this table with all of these art materials on them, and they all made masks. And then they all had to get up and tell us the meaning of that mask, what it meant for them, and how it was a projection of one, usually in one way or another, about them. Another thing that we do in presentations is there's always a stress on personal application. So if anybody is, everybody, when it's all over, has to go away with something that they can use practically within their own life. So we always plan ahead to make sure that there's something in there immediately, and then also in the long run. And then, I also have to ask, you've all been in front of an audience and giving a presentation. I take it that everybody's had that experience. And what's the greatest thing that can happen in front of an audience? Giving a presentation, or teaching a class, or leading a class in a discussion. People ask questions. That's good. Huh? It comes to an end. Sometimes that's very good. Maybe that's a hint that I'm out of time. Any others? Insight. What does that sound like? Show me.
An aha moment with words.
Show me. Yeah. I'm with you on that. I would say the greatest moment is when everybody at that one moment, as there is the end of a sentence, there's that collective in-breath, and there's that, or, oh, and that makes the day, whenever that happens. I think for me, that's the biggest reward when that happens. Probably no R or O moments in this one, but we can't do that in every presentation. Last thing I'll share with you. Recently, I was asked to the Texas Federation had contacted us, and they'd asked me to do something for the Federation in San Antonio, Texas. And we thought that was a pretty good deal because they were going to pay for our airplane trip, so who would want to miss a good airplane trip? They asked what I wanted to do, and I says, well, I always wanted to present the secret doctrine in a new and a different way to a group of people that theoretically don't really know that much about the secret doctrine, or never really engaged themselves in the secret doctrine. This is a first-time introduction into it. So they were good for that. So I put together, for the first time in my life, a PowerPoint presentation, and I read all the instructions carefully, including on the instructions of don't do's, like don't put any more than 5 words on a single slide. Don't use pictures and diagrams, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here were all these slides with pictures and diagrams on them and very little words, usually only one or two. And then, since this was an updated version of PowerPoint, I was able to also sneak in a couple of little video movies that you can now sneak into PowerPoint, 2 or 3 minute movies. They would illustrate points. And so think about how's the secret doctrine first usually presented. Usually they start out with the 3 fundamental propositions, and then they start going through one at a time with the Theosophical teachings. You might call that that. Well, first of all, theosophy is a word that might be mentioned 3 times at most in the secret doctrine. I'm yet to see, and I've been reading the secret doctrine over and over again for, well, since about 1964. And I haven't seen anywhere where the term secret doctrine is clearly defined. She points at it, she hints, but she doesn't say, this is the secret doctrine. Wake up now. This is the secret doctrine. This is the bottom line. So read it, then might come out at the end, what is the secret doctrine? So that became the leading question. And then we had a 3-day conference with the PowerPoint and the presentation. But that 3-day conference, there was nothing in it about the formal Theosophical teachings, but it was all about the secret doctrine. And we started the secret doctrine with where people need to be who are not introduced to the secret doctrine. So we started out first with HPB's use of language. What is a metaphor? What is a symbol? What is an emblem? What is an analogy? What is correspondence? And then also examples in our own day-to-day life as to what those things are. So we didn't even have to refer to the secret doctrine. How do we run across them in life, in our own day-to-day experience? Metaphor. Actually, there was one movie I wanted to run. It was a advertisement ran a few years ago about a bunch of cowboys that were herding cats. You might remember that one. I think it was for a life insurance company. That's a metaphor, herding cats. It's a metaphor that an 8th grade teacher understands best. So after that, then we were able to address some universal principles, cycles, evolutions, the idea of the arc of the shadow, the arc of the light, karma. Karma was a circle of dominoes and a circle. Person sitting in the middle is in the place of where a domino might be in the circle. He pushed a domino. Dominoes are coming around, and of course when it finishes coming around, they bash him. What comes around goes around. That's that in a single image gives a person an idea of what karma is about. Gives them an idea. Talk about 3 lines of evolution. Page 191, paragraph 2, volume 1. Actually, if you don't have that one down, you're never going to follow what HPB is saying in the rest of the book, because she constantly switches context from speaking from a spiritual level to an intellectual level to a physical level, and jumping back and forth from paragraph to paragraph. And if you're not aware of that by the context of what she's talking about, the secret doctrine is going to be a book of huge confusion. And is one of the big reasons why people read the book and are confused after reading it, because they missed that paragraph on page 191, paragraph 2, volume 1. Vocabulary is also a problem, but I usually tell students to get into secret doctrine not to worry, because almost all the words are defined in the first 350 pages of volume 1, in which case they usually return by throwing the book at me. Somehow it's not encouraging. So, talk about metapsychosis, reincarnation, simple diagrams. You can get it in a minute. You can get the ideas in a glance without a half hour or an hour lecture on any of them. You can get those ideas at a glance. Then, that was the first half of the seminar. The second half of the seminar I spent on the 7 keys of the mystery language, because they were ready for it. And I hadn't seen any literature that has really covered that in depth. But we did it. We did it in depth. Put the 7 keys in order, which they're not in an order in secret doctrine, and the significance of each, and mythology as examples of each of the 7 keys, interpreted individually and in combination. And well, when the presentation was over, they invited us to come back in 2 years and do another one. So it seemed to have been a success. So that's how interactive presentations go. And so I have given that to you in a boring pedagogical way with very little interaction. So mine is an example as to what not to do. April was a great example of many techniques of what to do. And I hope that a part of your mind was analyzing what she was doing and maybe got some good ideas out of some of the techniques that she had used. And hopefully you got some ideas out of some of the descriptions that I have made as to what we have been doing. So, is there any questions? Because if there's any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. You told about the archive. Are you also busy with digitizing the material?
Presently, I'm busy with cataloging the material. The material first has to be cataloged, and then once it's cataloged, then I'm in a position to thoroughly understand what is in there. And as I said, there's in excess of 150,000 documents there, unpublished documents, so it's a long project. Before the catalog is finished, I'm sure that there will be some material that will be digitized and put on the internet, as people have been saying. And I don't have a problem with that. There is one comment that I do want to make about digitizing and putting things on the internet, as long as you brought it up. First of all, I think that people need to think carefully and to realize, unless you can tell me I'm dead wrong on this, but I don't think I am, that once something is put on the internet, it becomes devalued in the minds of most people. Doesn't have the value anymore. So people say, oh, that's on the internet, I'll go and look at it later. You know, I'm busy doing something else. Doesn't have the value. Oh, well, anybody can see that, that's on the internet. So there is something about having an archive where a person has to make a real effort to see something, to really try. I think they appreciate it more when they have to put an effort in on their own part. There's no effort involved in clicking a mouse and bringing up a document on the internet. That's for my second comment on it, is that anything that is digitized and goes up on the internet that is a historical document, I think that we have people that are doing that. I think it's very important that they keep in mind or be aware that every single document has a context. And just by putting the document up on the internet, a person looking at it, especially if they don't have a very solid history of theosophical history, which I would say is, I'm speaking about 98% of people that are interested in theosophy, do not have a solid background in theosophical history. Therefore, they are in most cases not able to recognize the context of a document that they might be looking at. So I would recommend, and I hope this is spread out, I mean, I hope that everybody hears it sooner or later that is doing it, is that if one puts a document up on the internet, that they also give a commentary, a description with it that gives the context and the meaning and the importance of the document. The context gives the importance of the document, and the context also gives a guide for the interpretation of that document. In other words, a document without context, a person can find a line in it that just happens to suit their argument, and they use it to prove for their argument, no matter how ridiculous the argument might be. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other? Well, okay, I think the caters, if the caters come in. Oh, we got another one? Okay.
You told that you had study groups about the Kabbalah, Zohar, Upanishads. Can you tell how many people are part of a study group and the method you used? For instance, if you have taken the Kabbalah, did you say, read it and then we talk about it, or look for references in the Theosophical literature? Dus how did you study, for instance, the Kabbalah? This method, and how many people were part of your groups?
Oh, that particular course, I think there was, about 12 to 14? Yeah, there's about 12 to 14 in that particular course. Kabbalah is very hard to read. So frankly, I had to do presentation on a lot of the material. Also, Zohar is very language bound. So part of doing that reading is that, and there was some protest for it, but I made them all learn the Hebrew alphabet and had them go through a grade school Hebrew readers so that they could actually go and read the Hebrew and make all the sounds and read the words and get a feel for the language. So, and that was very helpful.
Did you use Wizard Bookshelf Zohar, or which version did you use?
No, we used selected pieces from various sources.
Okay.
So we didn't use a text for that one.
Because Wizard has the secret doctrine.
Oh yes, I'm quite aware of it, and I'm quite aware of the history of it. And thank you for your assistance in it. Anybody else?
Was a question here about the Wizard, what the Wizard bookshelf exactly is. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that?
Pardon me, ask that again.
What the Wizard bookshelf exactly is. It's not a known element here with some people.
The book is currently out of print right now, but it went through about 4 editions, I believe, and originally Richard Robb, who was here this morning, who publishes the Secret Doctrine reference series, had a copy of the Zohar that was published in the journal called The Word, around 1910, by an author with the pseudonym Nurho Damanhar, which the only person we've found that might be is a person by the name William Williams from the Golden Dawn, which I suspect is another pseudonym. And he came to me and said he's really in trouble. He has all these sales of the Zohar, and he's having trouble getting it out, and he's discovered that it's only the first, I think it was 13 chapters of Genesis, not the whole Zohar, which is a big set. So I said, well, Blavatsky only commented on the first 4, 6 chapters of Genesis. Why don't you let me put together a Secret Doctrine commentary on it? So we took a year and cut up several copies of the Secret Doctrine and selected passages that were apropos to the quotes, and it's in the marginal references of the of the Zohar that he published, and I put together that in footnotes, and then in marginal notes down the side I made comments to kind of explain the Hebrew esoteric part and some of the traditional things that would not be understood by most Gentiles. And
The Goyim.
The Goyim, yeah. And most Jews included. So that was the history of the Zohar. It's been published, and I believe you can still find it. I think the primary purchaser of that was the Baptist College. So, that is worthwhile buying if you can find it. And the Wizards Bookshelf in Michigan says they can't afford to reprint it, but we're hoping they'll do it in print on demand. So.
Okay, I'm getting signals from the directors, those who must be obeyed, that dinner is served. So if you have any more questions, I'll be glad to talk to you during dinner.